She married a stranger to save her family. He married her to save his image. For 30 nights, she locked the bedroom door. For 30 nights, he waited on the other side. But everything changed the night he found her secret diary. On the 40th night, it happens. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The vineyard stretched endlessly under the pale golden light of late afternoon. Rows of Cabernet vines, ripe with the September harvest, whispered with the breeze as if murmuring secrets of love, loss, and everything in between. On the crest of a hill, nestled between two ancient oaks, stood a glass and stone estate, modern, sharp-edged, and utterly breathtaking. It was a place made for fairy tales. But for Sophia Bennett, this was no fairy tale. The lace on her wedding gown scratched lightly against her skin. Her hands were cold, clasped tightly in her lap as she sat in the bridal suite, staring blankly into the antique mirror. Her eyes, wide, solemn, looked older than her 24 years. Her reflection didn't look like a bride. It looked like a girl being dressed for something she didn't choose. There was a knock. Her mother peeked in, eyes red-rimmed, her voice soft. "It's time." Sophia nodded, rising slowly. Her long, dark curls had been pinned perfectly by the stylist. Her veil shimmered like frost. Her shoes pinched slightly. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. Downstairs, 100 guests mingled beneath floral arches, sipping champagne and whispering about the couple who hadn't even smiled together once during the engagement dinner. There had been no courtship, no photo shoots, no storybook proposal. Just a contract. Sophia's father, a proud old publisher whose business was gasping for air, had struck a deal with Peter Callahan's family, tech royalty from Silicon Valley. The Callahans needed a respectable image for their wayward son. The Bennetts needed saving. So a union was arranged, like something out of an era long gone. As she stood at the top of the steps, Sophia saw him, Peter Callahan, waiting at the altar beneath the grapevine trellis. Tall, dressed in a custom midnight blue tuxedo, jaw clenched like he was biting down regret. He was handsome, striking even, but cold, distant, arrogantly self-possessed. They had met twice before today. Once over a tense brunch with both families, where he'd barely looked up from his phone. The second, a private dinner where she tried to ask him about books and hobbies, and he'd answered in clipped syllables before returning to talk of mergers and stock options. She had walked away from that night with a single thought: I don't trust him. I don't even like him. Still, she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was quick, polished, hollow, vows written by lawyers, not lovers. Peter said his lines with robotic charm. Sophia's voice only trembled once. When the officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride," Peter hesitated, just for a breath, then pressed a soft, quick kiss to her cheek. The guests applauded politely. Champagne flutes were raised. A jazz band played something slow and romantic. And inside, Sophia felt nothing. At the reception, they danced under fairy lights. She kept a small smile on her lips while he rested a respectful hand on her waist, but their bodies never touched more than they had to. No inside jokes. No whispered affections. Just two beautiful strangers moving in synchronized silence. She tried once to bridge the gap. "You really don't like being here, do you?" she asked, looking up at him as they swayed. Peter blinked, surprised she'd spoken. He gave a short exhale, almost a laugh. "I don't think either of us do." His honesty stung more than lies would have. That night, when they returned to the estate's master bedroom, silence blanketed the space between them. The room was exquisite, warm lighting, rose petals on the bed, champagne chilling beside a chocolate cake. Someone had tried to make it romantic. Sophia walked slowly to the window, pulling her veil off and staring out over the darkened vineyard. Peter unbuttoned his cuffs behind her. "Look," he said, his voice softer than before. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't weird. I'm not expecting anything." She turned to him. Her hands were steady now, her voice clear. "Good. Because I don't owe you anything just because a contract says I do. His brow lifted slightly. He looked at her, really looked for the first time. I agree. A silence passed. I'll take the guest room, he said. She nodded. He picked up a pillow and a folded blanket and walked out without another word. When the door clicked shut, Sophia sank to the floor beside the bed. Her gown pooled around her like spilled milk. Her fingers reached under the mattress and pulled out the leather-bound diary she had brought from home. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. Day 1 of marriage. He's a stranger, and I am a stranger to him. But I won't let anyone touch me until they've touched my soul. That's the only way I'll ever be safe. Outside, the moon hung low over the vines. Inside, in 2 separate rooms, 2 strangers lay awake, married but oceans apart. And so began the 30 nights of distance. The first night passed like a winter wind, cold, silent, and unsettling. Sophia slept with the bedroom door locked. She woke the next morning with a dull ache in her chest, a sensation she couldn't name. She had expected awkwardness, maybe even loneliness. But what she hadn't expected was how empty it would feel to wake up in a beautiful mansion, a wedding ring on her finger, and no warmth beside her. Downstairs, she found Peter already at the breakfast table. He was dressed in a crisp black shirt, scrolling through something on his phone. A cup of coffee steamed beside his elbow, untouched. He looked up briefly when she walked in. Morning, he said. Morning, she replied, her voice small, like it hadn't been used yet today. The silence stretched again. She poured herself tea and sat across from him. He didn't ask how she slept. She didn't ask what his plans were. They were polite, cordial, strangers with rings. The first week set the rhythm. Peter stayed busy. He left early each morning for the city, where he worked on the West Coast branch of his family's AI company. He rarely came home before dark. When he did, he often brought his laptop to dinner, half listening while reviewing reports. Sophia, for her part, kept to herself. She spent long hours in the private library reading, wandering the gardens, writing in her diary. Every night, they met briefly in the hallway outside the bedroom. And every night, the same dance. He would pause, hand on the doorknob, glance at her. She would say, quietly but firmly, I'm not ready. Sometimes she added, good night. Sometimes she just walked in and closed the door behind her. Peter never protested, never pushed, never asked why. But the rejection lingered between them like the scent of unlit candles, full of what could be, but never was. By night 10, the house had become a palace of silence. Sophia found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. Not because she was interested, at least that's what she told herself, but because she was trying to understand him. He was polite, respectful, even considerate in quiet ways. He never entered her space without asking. He never commented on her boundaries. But he was also detached, like someone trained not to feel too deeply. She often wondered if this was all just another business merger for him. One evening, over dinner, he asked, Do you ever write? She looked up sharply. Why would you ask that? I noticed you carry that little leather book with you. Same one every day. Just curious. She hesitated. I do. What do you write about? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Thoughts. Feelings. Things that matter to me. He nodded. That's good. She waited for him to say more. He didn't. That night, she wrote in the diary. He notices. He doesn't ask much, but he notices. I think he's trying in his own way. But trying isn't the same as understanding. By night 15, frustration began to show. Sophia heard Peter on the phone one afternoon in his office. The door was ajar. No, I haven't touched her. She made it clear. I'm not going to force something that's not there, he snapped. I don't care what the lawyers expect. I'm not a goddamn animal. She froze in the hallway. It was the first time she realized that maybe he was under pressure too. That maybe this wasn't easier for him either. Later that night, she found a book on her side of the bed, an old copy of Wuthering Heights. Her favorite. Inside was a note in his handwriting. You mentioned you loved this once. Thought you might like this edition. P. She stared at it for a long time before setting it gently on the nightstand. Still, when he stood outside the bedroom door, waiting for a sign, she shook her head again. "I'm not ready." And once again, he left without complaint. By night 20, something had shifted. They started eating dinner together every night. Peter began sharing stories from his past, his mother's early death, his lonely boarding school years, how he hated being treated like a product of wealth. Sophia listened more than she spoke, but when she did, her voice began to soften. She told him about her mother's illness, her dream of becoming a writer, how she grew up in a small Georgia town where no one divorced and everyone believed in church and secrets. They began learning each other's rhythms. She realized he always tapped his thumb twice before speaking when nervous. He noticed she always stared at the horizon when thinking deeply. But the nights still ended the same. "I'm not ready." "I understand," he said. And he meant it. By night 25, Sophia was confused. She found herself waiting for him to come home. She hated how her heart fluttered when she heard the front door open. She hated how she replayed their conversations in her mind before bed. She hated how kind he was, because it made it harder to justify keeping him at a distance. That night, she opened her diary and wrote, "He's not who I thought he was. He's not pushing, not pressuring. He's patient. Too patient. And somehow that makes it worse. Because I don't know how long I can hold this wall up." Still, she held it. By night 29, it rained. They sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the storm. Sophia sipped tea while Peter rested his elbows on the railing. Neither spoke. The silence was no longer awkward. It had matured into something safe. Suddenly, he turned to her. "Can I ask you something personal?" She nodded slowly. "Do you think we'll ever get there? You and me?" She looked at him for a long time, then turned back to the rain. "I don't know, but I think I want to." It was the most honest thing either of them had said. Night 30. He knocked gently, even though he hadn't in weeks. She opened the door halfway, stared up at him. There was a long pause. "I'm not ready," she whispered. Peter nodded. "Okay." But as he turned to go, her voice stopped him. "Peter." He turned. I'm starting to trust you." A small, surprised smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Thank you." She watched him walk away, closed the door, locked it, then opened her diary and wrote, "Tomorrow is night 31. I don't know what will happen, but for the first time, I'm not afraid." It was the afternoon of the 30th day. The estate was quieter than usual. Sophia had been gone since morning. Her mother had suffered a sudden health scare, and she'd rushed to Atlanta on the first available flight. Peter had offered to charter a private jet, but she'd declined. "I need the time to think," she'd said. Her absence hung in the air like unfinished music. Peter wandered through the house, aimless, his thoughts unusually noisy. He tried working, emails, performance reports, quarterly projections, but couldn't focus. The chair in his office felt too stiff. The coffee tasted like metal. Even the rain outside sounded impatient. He found himself walking through rooms he rarely entered. The library, the sunroom, the upstairs sitting area with its velvet armchairs no one ever sat in. Eventually, without thinking, he ended up back in the master bedroom, the room that had become hers. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, unsure whether he should even step inside. The room still smelled like her, jasmine and something warm, maybe sandalwood. The comforter on the bed was half folded. A cardigan was tossed over the edge of a chair. There was a stillness to the space, intimate and untouched. He only meant to grab his charger. But when he knelt beside the bed to reach under the nightstand, something caught his eye. A book. Thin, dark brown leather, worn at the edges. No title. A simple red ribbon threaded through the center. Her diary. Peter froze. He should have turned away. Should have left it untouched. Should have respected the invisible boundary she had so clearly drawn between them. But something pulled at him. A low, steady ache that had grown every day she refused to let him in. An ache not of lust, but of longing, to understand her, to reach the core of who she was beneath the cold surface and locked doors. His fingers hovered over the cover. Just one page. He opened it. The ink was dark, neat, steady. Day 1. I don't know him. I don't want to know him. Not yet. Not like this. He kept reading. Day 2. He's not cruel. He's not aggressive. But silence can be its own kind of weapon. Day 5. He brought me coffee. He didn't know I don't drink it. I said thank you anyway. I don't want him to feel rejected, even though I'm doing it every night. Day 10. He waits outside the door sometimes, like he's hoping I'll change my mind. But how can I? He hasn't even tried to know me. He wants a wife, but he doesn't even see the woman in front of him. Page after page unfolded a version of Sophia Peter had never met. Vulnerable, articulate, afraid, and yearning. Her words were heavy with doubt and guarded hope. She didn't hate him. She didn't despise the marriage. But she feared being claimed without being known. Touched without being felt. The deepest blow came with a line from day 19. If only he asked about my favorite poem. If only he sat and talked to me the way lovers do, not business partners. I wonder if he even knows what my laugh sounds like. Peter stared at that line for a long time, the diary open in his lap. A cold realization began to spread through him. He had been present, but never real. He had played the role of the respectful husband, the distant gentleman, the one who never crossed boundaries. But he had never reached out, never let her see the man, only the mask. And somehow, in doing nothing wrong, he had done everything wrong. He closed the diary gently, like it was made of glass. He put it back exactly where he found it, aligning the spine to match the impression it had left on the wood. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. For the first time in years, Peter Callahan felt shame. Not for what he had done, but for what he had failed to do. That evening, he stayed home. He didn't work. He didn't pace. He didn't pour himself a drink like he often did on nights when the silence between them became unbearable. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table and made tea green jasmine, the one he remembered she liked. He found her collection of poetry books and leafed through them. He read lines from Neruda, from Emily Dickinson, from Mary Oliver. He let the words sink in. By the time the clock struck midnight, she still hadn't returned. He stood on the balcony, staring out over the dark vineyard below, thinking of the way her handwriting tilted slightly to the left, the way she signed her name at the end of each entry, like she was writing to herself in the future. He wasn't sure if she'd know he had read it, but he knew that what he did next would have to matter more than what he had read. The next morning, he woke early. He left a handwritten note on her nightstand. You deserve more than patience. You deserve presence. Starting now, I'll be here, not just in the house, but in the way you need me to be. One step at a time, if you'll let me. Then, for the first time in 30 days, Peter didn't leave for the office. He stayed and waited for her to come home. Sophia returned home just before sunrise on the 31st day. Her mother was stable. The doctors had assured her it wasn't as serious as they feared, just a scare. But the time away from the estate from Peter had done something she hadn't expected. It made her miss him. Not in the romantic, breathless way she had read about in books, but in a quiet, aching way that crept in when she least expected it. She thought of the tea he'd brought her, the way he'd asked her about her writing, the softness in his eyes the night he asked if they'd ever get there. And now, standing in the foyer, suitcase in hand, she noticed something different. The house smelled like fresh bread. Not store-bought. Homemade. She blinked, unsure. Then followed the scent into the kitchen. Peter stood by the stove, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, an apron that clearly didn't belong to him tied loosely around his waist. Flour dusted at the edge of his brow. He looked up when she entered. His eyes, those serious eyes, lit up, not with excitement, but with relief. You're back, he said simply. Sophia nodded, setting her bag down. I didn't expect you to be home. I took the day off, he said, turning back to the counter. Figured the world could survive without me for a few hours. She didn't know what to say. So she watched him. Watched the way he carefully moved around the kitchen, as if trying not to disturb the air between them. I made bread, he said, almost sheepish. You mentioned once that your mom bakes when she's anxious. I thought maybe it'd help. Or at least smell like home. Sophia stepped closer. You remembered that? He nodded. I remember more than you think. They sat together at the small table by the window. The bread was warm, imperfect, but filled the kitchen with comfort. He poured her tea, the right kind this time, without asking. For a while, they ate in silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. I found your note, she said finally. He set down his mug. I meant every word. Sophia looked at him. Really looked. Something had shifted. Peter's posture was different. No longer closed off, no longer guarded by cool detachment. There was openness in the way he faced her now. A humility she hadn't seen before. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to win her over. He was just present. You didn't have to stay home, she said softly. I did, he said. Because I wanted to be here when you walked through the door. I didn't want to miss you. Her breath caught slightly. She wanted to ask, why now? Why this sudden change? But part of her already knew. He'd read the diary. She didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, she watched what he did next. Over the next few days, Peter changed in ways that were almost imperceptible unless you were paying attention. And Sophia was paying attention. He asked her real questions. Not polite ones. Not business ones. But questions that probed gently into who she was, who she'd been before this arranged life began. What was your favorite book as a kid? Why do you always touch your necklace when you're nervous? What would you do if this marriage hadn't happened? Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she didn't. But each time he asked, she felt her walls shift, just a little. He began leaving handwritten notes in her books. Quotes from poems. Observations. Once a single line. Some people wait a lifetime for someone to listen. I'm listening. P. She found herself looking forward to his presence. They started taking walks through the vineyard in the late afternoons. No one prompted it, it just happened. And during one walk, she found herself laughing, really laughing, at a story he told about boarding school and a goat that got into the chemistry lab. He stopped mid-story, stunned. That's the first time I've heard you laugh. Sophia blushed, tucking her hair behind her ear. It's been a while. I like it, he said. A lot. Her chest warmed, the compliment sincere and clean. No flirtation, no expectation. Just truth. One evening, Peter set up a projector in the garden. When she stepped outside, there was a blanket laid out, candles in jars, and a screen fluttering slightly in the wind. You did this, she asked. He nodded. You mentioned once you never got to see Pride and Prejudice in theaters. I figured we could make our own. Sophia sat beside him on the blanket. As the film began, she felt herself lean into his shoulder. Slowly. Naturally. No tension. No fear. By the time Darcy confessed his love on screen, her hand had found Peter's. She didn't pull away. He didn't say a word. That night, as she climbed into bed, she opened her diary. She stared at the blank page for a long moment, then began writing. He is becoming the man I once wrote about. Not because I asked him to. Because he chose to. For the first time, I feel seen. Heard. Not just married, but met. She closed the book and slid it under the pillow. For the first time in many nights, she didn't lock the door. And down the hall, Peter sat awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if tomorrow would be the night she finally said, I'm ready. It rained for 2 days straight. Heavy, unrelenting rain that wrapped the vineyard in a soft gray hush. The vines bent beneath the weight of it. Leaves shimmered with droplets. The sky hung low, like it had something to confess. Sophia sat on the window seat in the upstairs reading nook, knees drawn to her chest, watching the water trail down the glass in trembling lines. She wore a thick sweater, sleeves pulled over her hands, and her diary lay closed beside her. She hadn't written in 2 nights. Not because she didn't have words, but because, finally, she wasn't writing to cope. For the first time since the marriage, her thoughts weren't clawing for space on the page. They were resting, breathing. So was she. From the hallway, she heard footsteps. Unhurried, soft. A knock on the doorframe. "Hey," Peter said. He wasn't wearing his usual business attire. Today he was in a charcoal hoodie and jeans, barefoot, his hair slightly damp like he'd just come from the porch. He looked tired, but peaceful. Sophia smiled slightly. "You're not working again?" He shrugged. "I told them I'm taking a few days. They can live without me." She nodded, glancing back at the window. He didn't enter. Instead, he leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Mind if I sit?" She patted the empty cushion beside her. He stepped in and sank down beside her, close enough that she could smell the rain on his clothes, the warmth of his skin. Not touching, but near. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the storm. Sophia finally spoke. "Do you like the rain?" "I do now." She glanced sideways, and he was already looking at her. "What changed?" she asked. "You," he said. Her cheeks flushed. She looked back at the window. Her fingers toyed with the corner of her sweater, twisting the thread. "I used to think you didn't care," she said softly. "I used to think I didn't know how to care." She turned toward him. "I read books," he continued, voice low. "I studied people. I closed deals. But when it came to feelings, real, messy ones, I kept my distance. It was easier. Safer." Sophia said nothing, but her eyes told him to go on. "I didn't realize how lonely that made me until I married someone who needed more than silence. More than presence." He swallowed. "Someone who needed me, not just my restraint." Sophia's eyes shone, not with tears, but with something quieter. Recognition. Understanding. "I was afraid of you," she admitted. He blinked. "Afraid? You had the power to hurt me. Without trying. Just by, expecting something I wasn't ready to give." She looked down. "I've never been touched. Never been close to anyone like that. I was raised to believe that kind of intimacy belonged only to love. And love doesn't come with a wedding certificate." Peter's voice dropped to a whisper. "I never wanted to be someone who took. I want to be someone you give to, when you're ready." Sophia looked up at him again. "Why didn't you say these things before?" she asked. "I didn't have the words," he replied. "Not until I started listening." A soft knock echoed inside her chest. A door that had been locked for so long. She reached out, slow and uncertain, and placed her hand on his knee. Just resting there. A featherlight gesture. But for Sophia, it felt like setting fire to a forest and watching it bloom instead of burn. Peter stilled. Then he covered her hand with his, warm and steady. Her heart beat hard under her ribs. But not from fear. From readiness. That evening, they shared dinner by the fireplace. Peter didn't try to impress her with gourmet food or wine. He made grilled cheese and tomato soup. They sat cross-legged on the rug, dipping crusts into warm broth, talking about nothing and everything. She told him about her childhood treehouse. The summer she fell out of it and broke her arm, but refused to cry because her father was watching. He told her about the time he got lost in Tokyo at 16. No phone, no GPS, just a pocket full of yen and a stranger who helped him find his way back to his hotel. By dessert, burned cookies, laughed over rather than mourned, they were sitting closer. Their knees touched. Sophia didn't move away. Later that night, as they walked down the hallway toward their separate rooms, she paused outside her bedroom door. Peter stopped too. She turned to him. "I'm not ready," she whispered. He nodded. "That's okay. But I want you to stay." He looked at her, unsure. "Not like that," she added quickly. "Just sit with me. For a while. If you don't mind." "I don't mind." They entered the room. She sat on the edge of the bed, and he sat beside her. No touches. No expectations. They talked. About poetry. About the kind of house she wanted to live in someday. About whether dogs or cats were better, they disagreed. About death and faith and how quiet love could be. She fell asleep with her head on his shoulder. And he stayed unmoving, heart full and still. In the early hours of the morning, she stirred and whispered into the dark, "You're not a stranger anymore." Peter smiled, eyes still closed. "Neither are you." In another room, the diary remained closed. Not because there were no words left, but because for the first time they were being spoken aloud. The day was clear for the first time in almost a week. The rain had passed, leaving the vineyard bathed in clean sunlight and the scent of wet earth. Dew clung to the leaves like forgotten teardrops. Everything felt reborn. Softer. Lighter. Sophia stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom that evening, her fingers tracing the thin gold chain around her neck. She wore a white linen dress, simple, soft, unadorned. It wasn't meant to seduce. It wasn't meant to impress. It was hers, and tonight, that felt like enough. The window behind her was cracked open. A breeze slipped in, playing with the hem of her dress and lifting the curtains. Outside, she could hear the sound of jazz floating from the garden speakers, faint and lilting like memory. Downstairs, Peter was lighting candles. He hadn't said much that day, not in words. But everything about him was quiet with purpose. The way he looked at her across the breakfast table. The way his hand brushed hers without tension. The way he smiled like he was waiting, not expecting. Tonight was night 40. And tonight she had chosen. The garden was transformed. Peter had strung lights between the old olive trees, each bulb casting a soft amber glow. A blanket had been laid out beneath them, scattered with pillows, and a small table held a tray of fresh strawberries, chocolate, and 2 glasses of sparkling water. No champagne. No assumptions. When she stepped outside, Peter turned. He froze for a moment, just a breath, and his lips parted, not to speak but in silent awe. "You look," he began, then stopped. "You look like peace." Sophia smiled. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "I didn't plan it for tonight," he replied. "I planned it for whenever you were ready." She moved closer. "I am." He didn't move. Instead, he looked at her, asking with his eyes. Her hand found his. She squeezed gently. "I want this." And that was all he needed. They lay beneath the canopy of lights, side by side, fingers intertwined. The world moved slowly around them. No rush. No heat. Just presence. 2 people who had waited, unwrapped each other layer by layer, and now stood on the edge of something tender and sacred. "Tell me something," she said, her voice soft as the wind. "Anything. When you read my diary, what made you keep reading?" He tensed just slightly. "You knew." "I knew." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't read it to invade you. I read it because I was failing you, and I didn't know how to stop." She nodded. "You didn't fail me. You just hadn't found me yet." He turned to her. "Have I found you now?" She met his gaze. "Yes." He leaned in. Not quickly. Not hungrily. But with reverence. As if she were something delicate, wild and whole, and not his to take, only to be invited. And she invited him. Their lips met, finally, like a secret kept too long. The kiss was not urgent. It was warm. It was slow. It was earned. Sophia trembled. Not from fear, but from how right it felt. Later, they moved inside. There were no clothes tossed hastily, no flickering lights or choreographed passion. Instead, there was laughter, quiet and shy, and nervous fingers fumbling with buttons, and long pauses between kisses where they simply looked at each other and breathed. She let him undress her one piece at a time. And when she stood before him, bare and unhidden, she saw nothing in his eyes but awe and gratitude. He touched her like she was art. Like every inch of her skin was a stanza in a poem he'd memorized, but never spoken aloud. She pulled him closer, whispered into his ear, "Please." And when they finally made love, it was slow and warm, full of whispered names and anchored hands and breaths that broke against one another. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that made it everything. Afterward, they lay tangled in each other. No words, just silence that said all the things language couldn't hold. Sophia pressed her cheek to his chest. She felt his heartbeat under her ear, steady, real. "I'm glad I waited," she murmured. Peter kissed the crown of her head. "So am I." She lifted her head and looked at him. "Do you feel different now?" He smiled. "I don't know. I feel closer to you. But not because of what we did. Because of how we got here." Sophia touched his face. "Me too." They fell asleep in each other's arms, skin to skin, soul to soul, the last remnants of distance dissolved like sugar in warm tea. And in the night, while he slept, she got up quietly and opened her diary one last time. Night 40. I gave him my body, but only after he earned my heart. He waited. He listened. He found the version of me I was too afraid to show. I'm no longer writing to survive this marriage. I'm writing to remember it. Because love didn't arrive at the altar. It arrived in the quiet, in the questions, in the waiting. And now it's here, in our bed, in our breath, in the way he looks at me like I am something sacred. And tonight I believe him. Morning came gently. Not with fanfare, but with light slipping through gauzy curtains, casting golden threads across the tangled sheets where Sophia and Peter still lay, legs entwined, their breathing synced in the kind of rhythm only closeness creates. Sophia stirred first. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the softness of dawn. For a moment, she didn't move. She just watched him. Peter, sound asleep beside her, his hand resting lightly against her stomach, his face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. Peaceful. That was the word. He looked peaceful. And for the first time in 40 days, no longer, so did she. No armor. No tension in her chest. No guarded space between her and the man she'd married. Just warmth. She reached for the diary on the nightstand. This time, it wasn't to hide her pain or measure her progress. It wasn't to survive. It was to remember. They spent the morning in bed. Not for physical reasons, though they touched, they kissed, but because they wanted to be near each other. The kind of nearness that didn't need constant words or action to feel real. Peter made her laugh, again, with a dramatic reading of a shampoo bottle label. Sophia rolled her eyes and shoved him gently, but her smile lingered long after. She read to him from her favorite poetry collection. He listened with his hand on her thigh, not possessive, just present. Around noon, they cooked together. Pancakes this time. Peter flipped one too early and laughed when it folded like an envelope. Sophia leaned against the counter, watching him. "You're not who I thought you were," she said, without malice. He turned to her. "And who did you think I was?" She shrugged. "A man with walls. Cold. Business-minded. Respectful but unreachable." He wiped his hands on a towel and moved toward her. "Some of that's true," he admitted. "But I think I built those walls because I didn't know what to do with something real." Sophia tilted her head, curious. "And what changed?" He reached for her face, brushed a stray curl from her cheek. "You did. That evening, they sat under the same olive trees where they'd first kissed, the string lights now dimmed by the fading daylight. The vineyard stretched out around them, golden with late September light. They sipped tea instead of wine. Her feet were in his lap. He was reading aloud from her diary. Not the parts about pain or fear, but the part she had shown him willingly that morning. "I married a stranger. I fell in love with a man who read my heart before he ever touched my body. And now, I don't want 40 nights. I want forever." He closed the diary and looked up at her. "Do you mean it?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "I wouldn't have written it if I didn't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A ring, not the one from their wedding, but a delicate band, silver and simple, with a single stone embedded in the center. "I wanted to give this to you when it felt real," he said. "Not arranged. Not required." He slid it gently onto her finger beside the wedding band. "This is for the second beginning," he said. "The one we chose." Sophia stared at the ring, then at him. "You know," she whispered, "I spent the first half of this marriage trying not to feel, because I thought feeling would get me hurt." Peter held her gaze. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I want to feel everything." They didn't call it a honeymoon. There were no planes booked, no hotel suites, no itineraries. Just slow days. Shared meals. Long walks. Nights spent with bare skin and soft conversation. Mornings filled with sleepy smiles and warm hands beneath the covers. Sophia began writing again, not just in the diary, but on her laptop. The first piece she wrote was called Marrying a Stranger. It was fiction, mostly, but the feelings were real. When she read the draft to Peter, he didn't interrupt once. At the end, he kissed her knuckles and said, "You're a beautiful storm, you know that?" She laughed. "What does that even mean?" It means you blew my entire life apart and somehow made it better. Weeks passed. Autumn came, turning the vineyard gold and crimson. They began planting herbs together, reading the same books at the same time. They fought sometimes about dishes, about work, about whether or not to get a dog. But they always ended the arguments the same way, by sitting down, facing each other, and talking. It was the one promise they never broke. No more silence. No more pretending. Only truth. One night, many weeks later, Sophia reached for the diary again. She hadn't written in it in a while, not because the story was over, but because she was finally living it. Still, tonight felt special. She opened to a fresh page and wrote. He was a stranger. So was I. Now we're both familiar. Not because we were forced into marriage, but because we made something out of it that no one expected. We built love, not with roses or perfect words, but with time, with listening, with patience. I no longer write to be understood. I write to remember. Because love, it turns out, isn't loud. It's soft hands, shared tea, the sound of his breath in the morning, the weight of his arm around me at night. It's not a firework. It's a steady flame, and I am no longer afraid of the light. She closed the book, set it aside, and climbed into bed, into his arms. And when he whispered, "Good night, Mrs. Callahan," she answered without hesitation, "I love you."
Thank you so much for listening to this story at Folklore Chronicles-k stories. And please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, kindly click on the subscribe button, turn on the notification so when I post more stories like this, you'll be the first to get them. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate your support and I do not take it for granted at all. Until I see you in my next video. Bye.